Elias Thorne worked the high country alone. His ranch was not a ranch in the way most men thought of one. It was a scar of cleared land on a high, wind-scoured mesa near the Colorado border, a place where the mountains bit down hard and the sky was too big. He lived in a cabin built of lodgepole pine, chinked with mud and desperation. It stood against the wind, and that was all that mattered. His days were a litany of survival, a stoic routine that pushed back the silence. Before the sun struck the peaks, he was moving. The cold was a physical weight, a presence in the cabin. He broke the ice in the water bucket with his fist. The sound a dull crack in the quiet. He built the fire, coaxed it from embers, his hands sure and rough. He made coffee, boiled black and bitter, and ate a piece of hardtack, his eyes fixed on the gray square of the window. He spoke to no one, save for his mule, a surly beast named Jericho, and even then, it was just a low command. His voice was a rasp, thick with disuse. The people down in the town of Junction, a 2-day ride if the weather held, whispered about him. They said he was a ghost, a man who had walked out of a blood feud in the territories. They said he had killed men, that his hands were stained. Elias did not care what they said. He had come to this high, lonely place to forget what his hands had done, to let the wind and the cold scour him clean. But the past was a stubborn stain, dark as old blood on a pine floor. The land was as unforgiving as his memory. Winter clung to the high country with greedy fingers. Snow lingered in the shadows of the north-facing slopes well into May, rotten and gray. The wind never stopped. It was a howl, a moan, a shriek that worked its way into the cabin's cracks and into a man's mind. At night, the wolves sang, their voices close, a reminder that death was always circling, waiting for a moment of weakness. His water came from a well he had dug himself, its side shored up with rock. In the deep cold, it was a battle. He would spend an hour with an iron bar, shattering the thick ice that formed overnight, just to lower the bucket. His hands would be numb, the rope searing his palms, but the water was sweet and cold, the only gentle thing in the whole landscape. He was mending a bridle, the leather stiff and cold in his grip. When he saw the wagon, it was not on his land, but far below, on the rutted track that passed for a road to Junction. He watched it for a long time, a dark speck crawling through the vast, empty basin. He felt a prickle of irritation. Strangers, they meant noise, questions, disruption. He turned back to his work, the needle punching through the leather with steady, short stabs. Clara Middleton stepped down from the wagon, her entire body aching with a deep, vibrating exhaustion. The dust of 3 weeks on the trail was ground into her skin, her clothes, her hair. It was in her mouth, a constant grit of defeat. She had clutched the hard wooden bench until her hands were raw, staring at the endless rolling brown hills and gray-green sage, willing a new life to appear. Junction was not a town. It was a wound, a handful of false-fronted buildings huddled together as if for warmth, bracing against the relentless wind. A saloon, a mercantile, a livery, and a small, white-painted church that already looked peeled and beaten. She had paid the wagon driver the last of her money. He tipped his hat, not meeting her eyes, and turned his team around, eager to be gone. She was left standing with her single trunk, a testament to a life packed away, a future she had paid for in advance. She pulled her shawl tighter. The air was thin and cold, and it stole her breath. She was supposed to be met Mr. Silas Croft, a man she knew only from 3 letters, his handwriting neat, his words proper. He owned a small claim. He had written he needed a wife. He was a good, plain man. Clara had agreed. She was 31, an age when women were supposed to be settled or invisible. Her life back in Ohio had been a quiet shame, a room in her cousin's house, a life of mending other people's clothes and eating scraps of pity. Silas Croft was an escape. He was a chance. She picked up her bag and walked on unsteady legs to the mercantile. The largest building, the sign, Hatcher's Good Supplies, was faded. Inside, it smelled of coffee beans, cured meats, and dust. A few men in denim trousers stopped their talk to look at her. A woman behind the counter, thin as a rail with tired eyes, paused in bagging flour. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "I'm looking for Mr. Silas Croft," Clara said, her voice sounding small. "He was to meet me. I am Miss Middleton." The woman's face softened with something Clara could not name. "Pity." "Oh, child," the woman said, wiping her hands on her apron. You did not hear?" A cold stone formed in Clara's stomach. "Hear what?" "Mr. Croft. He passed on. It's been near 6 weeks now. The influenza. It took him quick." The sounds in the store muffled. The men's low voices. The scrape of a barrel. Clara felt the floor tilt. 6 weeks. She had been on the trail for 3. He was dead before she even left St. Louis. "Dead?" she whispered. "I'm awfully sorry, ma'am." The woman, Mrs. Hatcher, said, "He was a quiet man, kept to himself. Buried him up on the hill." Clara backed away, one hand reaching for the doorframe. Stranded. The word was a bell tolling in her head. She had no money. She had no home. She had no one to claim her. She had burned the bridge back to Ohio. There was nothing to return to but scorn. She stumbled outside and sat on her trunk. The sun was beginning to drop behind the sharp, dark mountains, and the air turned instantly, bitingly cold. People passed, glanced at her, then looked away. A mail-order bride arrived for a dead man. She was an embarrassment, a piece of unclaimed freight. The whispers had already begun. She had heard them on the trail, from the wives of settlers heading west. A woman traveling alone, of her age. She must be desperate, or worse, she must be flawed, barren, perhaps, or carrying some hidden scandal. A woman did not come west for a stranger unless she was running from something. Clara was running. She was running from a past that felt like a stain, a moment of violence in her youth that had left her feeling soiled, unworthy. She had come west to wash herself clean in a new life, and now that life was buried on a cold hill. Elias had not intended to go to Junction. He was low on salt and coffee, but he could make do. But the sight of that wagon had unsettled him. He saddled his horse, a big roan gelding, and left Jericho to curse his absence at the cabin. The ride down was steep, and he moved with the grim efficiency of a man who wasted nothing. Not a movement, not a thought. He saw her as soon as he rode into the main street. She was sitting on a trunk, small and dark against the raw wood of the mercantile. The sun was gone, and the purple, frozen shadow of the mountains was crawling across the town. She was shivering, her face pale, her bonnet askew. He saw the way the town looked at her, the quick, sideways glances, the women who pulled their skirts aside as they passed. He knew that look. It was the look they gave him, the look of judgment. He tied his roan to the rail, his movement stiff. He did not want this. It was not his concern. He went into Hatcher's. "Thorne," Hatcher said, nodding. The man was always nervous around him. "Salt, coffee, ammunition," Elias said, as Hatcher weighed the salt. Elias jerked his chin toward the window. "Who is she?" "Mail-order bride. For Silas Croft." Hatcher shook his head. "Showed up today. Poor soul. Croft's been in the ground over a month." Elias took the bag of salt, his face impassive. He paid in coin, not speaking again. He loaded his supplies into his saddlebags, his back to the woman. He could feel her desperation like a physical cold. He untied his horse. He put one foot in the stirrup. He stopped. He cursed, a low, vicious sound under his breath. He turned. He walked over to her. She looked up as his shadow fell on her. Her eyes were wide, full of a dry, brittle fear. "You got business here, ma'am?" His voice was like gravel. She flinched. I was to be married to Mr. Croft. He is deceased." "I heard," Elias said. "So what are you figuring to do? The stage does not come back through for a week, and it costs money." Her face crumpled. "I have no money. I do not know." Elias looked up at the ridge line. The wolves would be hunting soon. The temperature was dropping fast. To leave her here was to kill her. The saloon would take her in. but not for free, and he knew what currency they would demand. The preacher and his wife had already locked their door. He felt a hot, angry guilt. He was angry at her for being there, at Croft for dying, at the town for its cold shoulders. He was angry at the world for putting this woman in his path, for forcing him to make a choice. His isolation was his armor, and she was a crack in it. "You cannot stay here," he said, his voice flat. "The wolves will find you 'fore morning, or the men from the saloon will. You can come to my cabin. One night." She stared at him, confused, terrified. "Your cabin?" "One night," he repeated, his voice sharp. "It's a 2-hour ride. Get your things." He did not offer to help. He swung up onto his roan. Clara, moving as if in a dream, numb with cold and fear, grabbed her small bag. "My trunk. Leave it. But everything I own. It will be here in the morning. Or it will not. It is the trunk, or your life. Decide." She dropped the handle of the trunk and hurried toward him. He leaned down, grabbed her arm, and hauled her up, settling her behind him on the horse's rump. She was light, like a bundle of dry sticks. "Hold on," he ordered. She put her hands hesitantly on his waist, her fingers barely touching the thick wool of his coat. "Hold on proper," he growled, "or you will fall and I will not come back for you." Her arms wrapped around him, her face pressed against his back. He could feel her trembling, a constant, fine shudder. He spurred the roan, and they left Junction, climbing into the swallowing dark. The ride was a nightmare. The wind howled, a physical blow that tried to rip them from the saddle. Clara clung to him, her eyes shut, her hands frozen. Elias rode in silence, his body rigid, furious at the soft, trembling weight against his back. He had not had another person this close in years. It felt wrong. It felt like a violation. When they reached the cabin, he slid from the horse and pulled her down. Her legs buckled, and he caught her, setting her on her feet impatiently. "Get inside." He tended to the horse, rubbing it down, giving it grain. The roan was his priority. The animal was honest. When he entered the cabin, she was standing in the middle of the small room, lost. The cabin was one room, clean but bare. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. A narrow cot was in the corner, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and shelves holding tins and tools. It was the cell of a man who asked for nothing. Elias moved past her, not looking at her. He lit the lantern, the yellow light pushing back the shadows. He knelt and built the fire, his movements economical. "There's the fire," he said, pointing. "The cot's there. I'll take the floor." Clara unwrapped the shawl from her head, her hands shaking so badly she could barely work the knot. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne. Mr. Thorne, I cannot go back. To the town, or back east." She was desperate, the words spilling out of her. "There is nothing for me there. I will work. I can cook. I can mend. I am not afraid of work." Elias stood up, turning to face her. His eyes were the color of the sky before a snowstorm, a flat, hard gray. "That ain't my concern. I'm not running a charity. I do not want you here. You understand me? This is not a rescue. This is one night. In the morning, I take you back to Junction. But they will. That is their business. And yours." He turned his back to her. A clear dismissal. He took his rifle from the wall pegs and began to clean it, the metallic click and slide of the mechanism filling the silence. Clara shrank. The coldness from him was worse than the wind. It was a personal, sharp-edged rejection. She was a burden, a piece of unwanted baggage. She sank onto the small stool by the fire, huddling toward the new warmth. But it could not reach the ice in her bones. Elias cooked. He threw strips of dried venison and a handful of beans into a pot with water and hung it over the fire. He cut 2 slices of bread. When it was hot, he ladled the thin, salty stew into 2 bowls. He handed one to her, his fingers brushing hers. She flinched. They ate in silence. The only sounds were the scrape of spoons against the tin bowls and the scream of the wind outside. Clara's exhaustion was so profound it was a kind of pain, but she could not sleep. The reality of her situation had finally settled. She was ruined, stranded in a wilderness with a man who looked at her as if she were a rock in his path. The shame of her arrival, the whispers of the town, the death of her only hope, it all crashed down on her. A tear slipped from her eye, hot on her cold cheek. She quickly wiped it away, but another followed, and another. She turned her face away from him, toward the fire, trying to muffle the sounds, but a small, choked sob escaped. She pressed her fist to her mouth, her shoulders shaking. It was not a loud grief, but a quiet, hopeless desolation. Elias sat on his bedroll across the room, watching her. His jaw was tight. He did not move. He did not know what to do with a woman's tears. Comfort was a foreign language, a weakness he had burned out of himself long ago. He wanted to tell her to stop. He wanted to tell her that tears did not fetch water or split wood, but her small, broken sounds scraped at something inside him, something he thought was long dead. It was an irritation, a pebble in his boot. He was rigid for a long minute. Then, with a low sigh of pure exasperation, he stood up. He walked to the peg by the door and took down his greatcoat. It was heavy wool, lined with sheepskin, smelling of pine, horse, and the cold, clean air of the high country. He walked to where she sat crying, her face hidden in her hands. He did not touch her. He did not speak. He simply opened the coat and draped it over her shaking shoulders. It was a staggering weight and a profound warmth. It enveloped her. Clara's sobs hitched. She looked up, startled. But he had already turned his back. He went to his bedroll, pulled off his boots, and lay down, facing the wall. "Get some sleep," he said to the logs. "The morning comes fast here." Clara sat for a long time, wrapped in his coat. The smell of him was not unkind. It was just solid, like the mountain. She finally lay down on the cot, pulling the coat over her like a blanket. She cried herself to sleep, but for the first time in weeks, she was not cold. The sound of an axe splitting wood woke her. It was not yet light, just a faint, gray promise in the window. The fire was already blazing. Elias was outside. She rose, her body stiff. She folded his coat and placed it on the chair. She found the water bucket and went outside. He did not look up from the log he was quartering. The axe rose and fell with a brutal, steady rhythm. He was a machine of work. Clara went to the well. She saw the iron bar and the thick sheet of ice covering the water. She understood. She picked up the bar, which was so cold it burned her hands, and began to strike the ice. It was hard, jarring work. It took her 15 minutes to break a hole large enough for the bucket. When she hauled the full, dripping bucket back to the cabin, Elias was there, watching her. His face was unreadable. He took the bucket from her. "I'm taking you to town after breakfast." Her heart sank. "Mr. Thorne," I said one night. He made coffee. They ate in silence. The ride back to Junction was cold and tense. He left her and her trunk on the porch of the Mercantile. "I thank you for the shelter," she said, her voice stiff with pride. Elias just nodded, his eyes already on the trail back to his mesa. He was halfway out of town when he heard the voices. "Spent the night up at Thorne's place. Did she?" It was a man's voice, lazy and cruel, coming from the saloon. "Well," a woman's voice replied, sharp with judgment. "Mrs. Hatcher." "What did you expect? She came all this way for a man who died. There's something not right about that. A woman her age, likely barren. No good woman waits that long to marry." Another woman chimed in. "Or maybe she's not good at all. Martha, a woman with a past. I'd wager. Now she spent a night with that man. She's unmarriageable now. That's certain. Impure." Elias stopped his horse. He saw Clara, standing by her trunk, her back rigid. He saw the townswomen scatter like hens when they saw him looking. He saw Clara's face, pale as ash, her eyes squeezed shut. He sat on his horse, trapped. Leaving her here was not just leaving her to the cold, it was leaving her to be torn apart. It was a death sentence of a different kind. He turned the roan, the horse sighing at the change of plans. He rode back and stopped in front of her. He did not look at her. He looked at her trunk. That heavy? What? She whispered, opening her eyes. The trunk. Is it heavy? Yes, very. He dismounted, without a word. He hoisted the heavy trunk onto his shoulder. The man was immensely strong. He grunted, settled its weight, and tied it onto the back of the roan, which flattened its ears in protest. Mr. Thorne, what are you doing? I'm building a fence, he said, as if it were an explanation. It's a two-man job, but I ain't got two men. He swung up into the saddle. He looked down at her. You can walk, or you can ride. I do not care which, but you are coming now. Clara stared at him. He was not offering kindness. He was offering a job. He was offering survival. It was more than anyone else had. She grabbed the stirrup leather and put her foot in his hand. He hauled her up behind him. They rode out of Junction, her trunk strapped to the horse, her arms locked around the waist of a silent, forbidding stranger. Back at the cabin, the air was different. It was not the air of a temporary shelter. It was the air of a tense, unspoken bargain. Elias dumped her trunk inside the door. That's your corner, he said, pointing to the cot. You eat what I eat. You pull your weight. You get in my way. You go back to town. Understood? Understood, she said. He grabbed his axe and went outside. He began digging post holes in the hard, half-frozen earth. He worked with a furious, contained energy, as if trying to punish the ground. Clara watched him for an hour, shivering in the doorway. He was building a new fence line for a pasture. The posts were heavy, stacked nearby. She put on her shawl and walked out to him. What can I do? He ignored her, swinging the post hole digger, his muscles cording in his back. She went to the pile of posts. She grabbed one. It was heavy, awkward, and rough with splinters. She grunted, her soft hands screaming, and dragged it to the first hole he had dug. He stopped, mid-swing. He watched her. Her dress was snagged, her face strained. She was not strong, but she was determined. She went back for another. He did not thank her. He did not acknowledge her. He just pointed to the hole. There, hold it steady. Clara wrestled the post upright and held it in the hole, her arms shaking. He shoveled dirt and rock back in, tamping it down with a heavy bar, his movements fast and precise. They worked all day. He dug. She hauled and held. Her hands were blistered, then bleeding. She did not complain. She just wiped the blood on her skirt and kept working. They did not speak. The only sounds were the thud of the digger, the scrape of the shovel, and the high, lonely wind. That night, they ate stew again. Clara's hands throbbed so badly she could barely hold the spoon. There's salve in that tin, Elias said, nodding to a shelf. It was the first thing he had said to her in 6 hours. She cleaned her hands and applied the stinging grease. He sat by the fire, sharpening his knife on a whetstone. The shing-shing-shing of the blade on the stone was a nervous, scratching sound in the quiet. He refused to speak of his past. He refused to ask about hers. Clara sat on her cot, rubbing her shoulders. She did not press him. The silence between them was as vast and cold as the land itself, but it was a shared silence. They were two people, side by side, facing the wilderness. And for now, that was enough. The bargain, once struck, settled over the cabin like a layer of dust. It was cold, silent, and present in every action. Elias did not treat her as a guest, nor as a woman. He treated her as a hand, a weak, inexperienced hand, but one he had nonetheless taken on. Clara, for her part, accepted the terms. Shame was a powerful motivator, but so was the raw, uncomplicated fear of starvation. She had seen the alternative in Junction. She had felt the eyes of the men in the saloon and the colder judgment of the women. This high, lonely mesa with its silent, brutal master was a sanctuary of a sort. It was a hard sanctuary, but it was honest. She rose before him. Though he rose before the sun, she learned to break the ice in the well without being told. to haul the water, her shoulders screaming in protest. The cabin was small, and she cleaned it with a fierce, quiet energy, scrubbing the pine floor, washing their few dishes, tending the fire. Elias watched her. He said nothing. Her first true test came with his small herd of cattle. They were rangy, wild-eyed creatures that survived on scrub and willpower. It was time to brand the new calves. Elias built a fire, the smoke stinging the cold morning air. He laid the branding irons in the coals. He rode out and roped a calf, dragging it back to the fire, its mother bellowing in protest. "Hold it!" he commanded. Clara looked at the struggling, terrified animal, then at the white-hot iron Elias pulled from the flames. "Hold it down!" She threw her weight onto the calf, her hands pressing its heaving side, her knee on its neck. She felt the heat before the iron even touched. The smell of burning hair and hide filled her lungs. The calf shrieked, a sound that cut her to the bone, and kicked, its hoof striking her shin hard enough to make her cry out, but she did not let go. She held on, her knuckles white, her eyes squeezed shut, until Elias grunted and pulled the iron away, leaving a stark, simple mark. He released the rope. The calf scrambled up and bolted back to its mother. They did this 4 more times. By the end, Clara was trembling, her dress slicked with mud and something worse. Her hands were raw from the rope she had used to help him. One palm was bleeding where a splinter from the fence post had torn it open. She went to the water trough, her stomach churning, and plunged her hands in. The icy water a sharp, clean pain. Elias came up beside her. He did not look at her. He looked at her hands, red and shaking in the water. He said nothing. He went back to the fire, kicked it out, and began coiling his rope. That night, after a silent meal of beans and salt pork, he tossed a small tin onto her cot. It was the same salve from before, but a new, full tin from his small store of supplies. It was not an apology. It was maintenance. A tool could not be left to rust. She mended his shirts. The wool was rough, the fabric worn thin as paper in places. She sat by the fire, her needle flashing, her stitches small and neat. She darned his socks. She patched the canvas tarp he used for the woodpile. Her hands, which had once been passably soft, grew a new skin. The blisters turned to calluses. The calluses cracked, and the salve was used nightly. She was becoming as hard as the land, her body learning the rhythms of survival. They ate in silence for the first week. The scrape of spoons on tin was the only conversation. But silence, in such a small space, grows heavy. It demands to be filled. It started, as it often does, with the weather. "It's a cold wind?" she offered one night, her voice small. Elias grunted, his eyes on the fire. "It's always a cold wind up here." The next night, she tried again. "Where I grew up, in Ohio, the trees would be turning now, red and gold." He stopped eating for a moment. "No trees here but pine. They do not turn. They just endure." Slowly, haltingly, she began to leave small pieces of her past on the table between them. She spoke of her mother, who had loved flowers. She spoke of a county fair, of the taste of apple cider. Simple, safe things. Elias remained a locked box, but he listened. She could tell by the way his hands would still, his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. He listened. One day, he spoke. "I had a brother, younger." Clara froze, not daring to breathe, afraid she would scare the words away. "He liked to whistle," Elias said, his voice rough. "Drove me half mad, whistled all the time, even when things were bad." He stopped, his face closing down. "He's gone." He stood abruptly and went outside, leaving his plate unfinished. Clara did not follow, but the stone wall between them had shown its first crack. He had shared a piece of his grief. She treasured it, polishing it in her mind. He had a brother. He missed him. Then the storm came. It did not arrive gently. It was a physical assault. The sky turned a bruised, greenish black, and the wind, which had always been a companion, became a screaming enemy. Then the snow began. Not the gentle flakes of her memory, but a hard, horizontal ice that struck the cabin like buckshot. "Bring in more wood." Elias yelled over the roar, "All of it." They worked for an hour, stacking the split logs inside until a full cord lined the back wall. Elias secured the barn, checking on the livestock. When he came back inside, his beard and coat were plated in ice. He barred the door. "We wait," he said. The storm lasted 4 days. The world vanished. There was no outside, only the shrieking wall of white. The cabin, which had felt small, now felt like a coffin. The wind hammered the roof, and snow piled up against the single window, plunging the room into a perpetual, gray twilight, lit only by the fireplace. They existed. They ate. They slept. They tended the fire. The space between her cot and his bedroll shrank to nothing. They were 2 bodies in a tiny, besieged ark. On the 3rd day, the monotony was absolute. Elias was staring into the flames, his face a mask of stone, but his knee was bouncing, a small, agitated motion. He was a man built for the outside, and the cage was wearing on him. Clara was mending the same shirt for the 3rd time. Her hands ached from the cold. She stood up to stretch, to move, to feel her blood. She walked past him, her hand brushing his shoulder in a simple, accidental gesture of passing. Elias flinched as if she had struck him with a hot iron. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently on the floor. He backed away from her, his breath hissing, his eyes wide and not entirely on her. "Do not," he choked out, his hand raised. Clara recoiled, terrified. "Elias, I barely touched you." But he was not seeing her. He was seeing a different woman, a woman with dark hair, like Clara's, a woman in a burning cabin, her hand reaching for him, Hannah, his brother's wife. He saw the smoke, smelled the whiskey on the raider's breath. He saw his own failure. He had been too late. He had saved himself, but not them, not his brother, not Hannah, his last failure. His touch, he believed, was a curse. Everything he was meant to protect, he destroyed. "Do not," he repeated, his voice a low growl of pain. He grabbed his coat and unbarred the door. "Elias, you cannot," Clara cried, seeing the white fury of the blizzard. "It will kill you. Leave me be," he roared, and plunged out into the storm. He was gone for an hour. Clara paced the cabin, her mind frantic. He had left in a rage, with no rifle, no supplies. She imagined him falling, freezing, being taken by wolves. She stood by the door, peering into the blinding white, calling his name until her throat was raw. When he returned, he was a creature of ice. He stumbled in, covered head to foot, his beard a solid block of frost. He did not look at her. He kicked the door shut, shed his coat, and went to the fire. He sat there, shivering violently, his back to her, and did not speak for the rest of the day. That night, the storm's fury lessened, replaced by a deathly cold. The cabin was silent, but the tension was a living thing. Elias lay in his bedroll. Clara sat on her cot, wrapped in every blanket she had. "I am sorry," she whispered into the dark. "I did not mean to startle you." He was silent for a long time. She thought he was asleep, or ignoring her. "It was not you," he finally said, his voice muffled. The quiet returned. But it was a different quiet. It was a shared darkness. Clara pulled her knees to her chest. She had seen his ghosts. It seemed only fair that he see hers. "Back in Ohio," she began, her voice trembling. I was not always with my cousin. When I was young, 19, I worked for a rich man, in his home. His wife was sickly." Elias did not move, but she knew he was listening. "He was not a good man. He liked to hurt things. He cornered me in the pantry. He took liberties." She kept her voice flat, reporting facts, pushing the emotion down. "I fought him. I struck him with a jar of preserves. He was furious. He tore my dress. He hurt me." She paused, the memory thick in her throat. "His wife found us. She did not believe me, or perhaps she did not care. She called me a harlot, a seductress. They threw me out. My father was a religious man. He believed them. He said I had brought shame on the family. He said I had a tainted spirit. He disowned me. The fire crackled. A sharp, sudden sound. My cousin took me in, but it was as a servant, a penance. I was the family scandal, the fallen woman. That is why I answered Mr. Croft's letter. I thought I could come west and be clean, that no one would know. She finally let the tears come, silent and hot. But the whispers started anyway. On the wagon, injunction, barren, impure. They were right. I am unworthy. I am not fit for a family. I am not fit to have children. I am spoiled goods. Elias. That is what he called me. Spoiled. She finished. Her confession laid bare in the tiny, cold cabin. She expected him to say something, to recoil, to tell her to be quiet. Elias Thorne said nothing. He lay on his back, staring at the dark roof beams, her words echoing in the silence. He heard her quiet, broken sobs until, finally, she fell into an exhausted sleep. The next morning, the storm had broken. The world was a blinding, pristine white. The sun on the snow was painful to look at. Clara woke late, her eyes swollen. Elias was already outside, shoveling a path to the barn. She got up, her body aching, and rebuilt the fire. She noticed it immediately. Her woodpile, the small stack she kept by her cot, was nearly empty. She had burned through most of it during the long, cold night. But now, it was piled high. Not just with the standard logs, but with smaller, cleaner pieces of split pine, wood that was easier for her to handle, that would burn hotter, quicker. He had gotten up in the dark, while she slept, and gone to his own precious, indoor stash. He had taken his best wood and placed it by her side of the hearth. He never spoke of what she had told him, and she never spoke of the wood. But the bargain had shifted. He was no longer maintaining a tool. He was protecting a person. The tension in the cabin did not disappear. It changed. It became thicker, charged. The accidental brushes of hands as they passed the coffee pot, the long, silent meals where she would look up and find him watching her, his gray eyes flat but intent. He started watching her braid her hair. It was a simple, nightly ritual. She would sit by the fire, her back to him, and unpin the long, dark mass. She would draw the comb through it, the one he had carved for her. He had done it during the storm, whittling a piece of scrap pine into a smooth, functional comb. He had left it on her cot without a word. She would braid it, her hands moving with a fluid grace that seemed out of place in their rough world. Elias would watch. His own hands clenched. He felt something stir in him, something he did not trust, something he had buried with his brother. It was a low, aching pull, a wanting. It made him angry. Then, the world changed. The great thaw began. It started as a sound, a dripping. Water. Released from its prison of ice, the snow on the roof began to slide, falling in great, wet slumps. The world, which had been white and silent, turned to brown mud and roaring water. The creek swelled its banks. The ground smelled of wet earth, of rot, and of new, green life. Patches of grass appeared, a desperate pale green. And one morning, Elias rode in from the small herd, a newborn calf draped over his saddle. Its mother had rejected it, or died. He brought it inside, to the fire. Clara, without asking, found a rag and began to rub the half-frozen creature, cleaning it, trying to warm it. She found a tin, watered down their precious canned milk, and dipped her finger in it, coaxing the calf to suck. It was a small, bony, ugly thing, but it was alive. After an hour, the calf shivered and tried to stand on its wobbly legs. It let out a weak bleat. Clara looked up at Elias, her face smudged with dirt, her hair falling from its pins, and she smiled. It was not a small, polite smile. It was a full, radiant breaking of her features. It was like the sun hitting the snow. It lit up the dim cabin. It lit up the dark, closed in places in Elias. He had never seen her smile. He had not known she could. He turned away, his heart kicking in his chest like a spooked horse. "It'll die," he said, his voice rough. "They mostly do." "No," she said, her voice soft but fierce. still stroking the calf. This one will live. Elias went outside, needing the cold air. He felt strange, unbalanced. That smile, it had done something to him. He hated it. He hated the feeling. It was a need. It was the same pull he had felt watching her braid her hair. It was weakness. He grabbed his axe and went to work. He attacked the woodpile with a fury. When that was done, he fixed the broken latch on the barn door, the one that had been broken for a year. He re-chinked the mud on the north wall of the cabin. He worked until his shoulders burned and the sun went down, trying to sweat the feeling out of him. He was fixing things she had not asked him to fix. He was making the burrow stronger, warmer. He was nesting. The realization disgusted him. But that night, he did not dream of Hannah. The calf lived. Clara named it Stubbs and fed it from her own rations of milk. It became her shadow. The spring advanced. The air grew warmer. The nights were still cold, but the sharp, killing edge was gone. One evening, after the chores were done, the sky was so clear it hurt to look at. The stars were not small, distant sparks. They were chips of ice, sharp and bright, close enough to touch. Elias was sitting on the bench outside the cabin, smoking his pipe, a rare indulgence. Clara came out and stood near him. She did not sit. She just looked up. They stood in silence for a long time, sharing the vast, cold beauty of the night. The only sound was the distant howl of a wolf, and Stubbs bleeding from the barn. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "Terrifying, but beautiful." Elias just grunted. She looked at him, a dark shape against the stars. "I was so frightened when I first came here," she said, her voice barely audible. "Of the land, of you." He did not move. "I am still frightened," she admitted. "But it is different now." She paused, gathering her courage. "You make this place feel less lonely." Elias went rigid. Her simple, honest words struck him harder than the blizzard. Less lonely. He had cultivated loneliness. It was his shield, his penance. And she, with her quiet work and her secret grief, had walked right past it. He said nothing. He knocked the ash from his pipe, stood up, and went inside, leaving her alone under the stars. But that night, Elias dreamed. He dreamed he was in the cabin, but it was warm. The fire was lit. He was lying on his bedroll, but he was not alone. Clara was beside him. She was not there out of necessity, not huddled for warmth or protection. She was not a burden he had to carry. In the dream, she had simply turned to him, her hair unbraided, and laid her head on his chest. She was not shivering. She was not crying. She was just there. She belonged. And in the dream, his hand, the one he believed was cursed, had come up to rest on her hair, and it felt right. He woke before dawn, the dream clinging to him. He was angry. He was terrified. He was, for the first time in a decade, terribly and profoundly confused. The high country spring had settled in, replacing the desperation of the thaw with the hard work of a new season. The air was thin and clear, and the sun had a genuine warmth. Elias and Clara had fallen into a rhythm, a shared existence that functioned on unspoken rules and shared labor. He worked the land. She worked the cabin and the small garden she had tilled with a stubbornness that amazed him. They were two solitary creatures, circling each other in the small space of the ranch. The outside world interrupted this fragile peace on a Tuesday, in the form of a horse and rider. Elias saw him coming from a mile off, a dark speck against the greening hills. He stopped mending the corral, his hand resting on the wooden rail, his body still. Clara came to the cabin door, wiping her hands on her apron. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice low. "Sheriff?" Elias said. He did not move until the rider was close. Sheriff Brody was a man worn down by his job and the land. He looked tired. He reined in his horse, a sway-backed dun, and nodded. He did not dismount. "Thorne! Brody! Just making the rounds," the sheriff said, his eyes scanning the ranch. He noted the patched roof, the new fence line, and the woman standing in the doorway. His gaze lingered on Clara for a moment. respectful but curious. Heard you were still up here, and not alone. Elias's silence was a wall. Brody sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, Thorn, I am not here to pry. I am here to warn. Amos Vane is in the territory. Elias's posture did not change, but a new stillness came over him, the stillness of a predator. Vane? Aye, the land baron from down south. He's been buying up everything south of the river, paying pennies. Or just squeezing. He bought out the Miller place. The widow Jessup, too. He's rolling up the whole valley. Word is, he wants the high country. He wants the water rights that come off this mesa. Elias looked at the creek, his creek, flowing steady and clear. This land is mine. I got the deed. Filed proper. A deed don't mean much to a man like Vane. Brody said quietly. He's got lawyers, and he's got men who ain't lawyers. He'll offer to buy. If you say no, he'll find a way to take it. He's coming. Elias, I just wanted you to know it. I know it. Elias said. The sheriff looked at Clara again, his expression softening with something like pity. You take care, ma'am. He tipped his hat. Thorn. He turned his horse and rode away. His shoulders slumped. A man delivering messages he did not want to carry. Elias watched him go. He picked up his hammer and struck the rail he was mending. The blow was so hard it split the new wood. He cursed, low and vicious, and threw the hammer to the ground. He went to the barn, and Clara heard him speaking in low, angry tones to his horse. The warning settled over them. The fragile peace was gone, replaced by a low, humming dread. They needed supplies. The encounter with the sheriff had made Elias darker, more volatile. He was restless, prowling the borders of his land, his rifle never far from his hand. We need flour, Clara said one evening, her voice quiet. And salt, and I need thread. Elias stared into the fire. He knew he could not go. Vane's men might be in town. He was known. A confrontation now, on their terms, would be foolish. He looked at Clara. He did not want to send her. He remembered the last time. I can go, she said, seeing the conflict in his face. I am not afraid of them. It was a lie, but a brave one. He nodded. Just once. Take the mule. Jericho, he'll get you there and back. Do not linger. Get the goods. Talk to no one. Come straight back. I will, she said. The next morning she rode out. The air was warm, and the ride down was easier than in the winter. But her stomach was a cold knot of dread. Junction, the whispers, the looks. She tied Jericho outside Hatcher's mercantile, keeping her head down. She slipped inside, grateful that it was, for the moment, empty save for Mrs. Hatcher. The woman's face tightened when she saw Clara. Miss Middleton. Mrs. Hatcher, I need 10 pounds of flour, 5 of salt, and a spool of black thread. Mrs. Hatcher turned to get the items, her movement stiff and disapproving. As she was weighing the flour, the door opened, and 3 of the town's women entered. They stopped cold when they saw Clara. It was Martha, the preacher's wife, and the 2 women who had gossiped before. Well, Martha said, her voice carrying in the small store. Look what the wind blew down from that godless mesa. Clara kept her back to them, her face burning. Please, she whispered to Mrs. Hatcher. Just the goods. In a hurry to get back to him. Are we? Another woman. Mrs. Davies said with a thin, cruel laugh. I am surprised he let you out of his sight. Or perhaps he grew tired of you. Be quiet, Elspeth. Mrs. Hatcher muttered, her hands shaking as she tied the flour sack. Why should I? Elspeth replied, stepping closer. Clara could feel the woman's eyes on her. She's a disgrace. Come in here, a bride for a dead man. No proper woman would do such a thing. She's a waste, is what she is. A burden on us all. And barren, Martha added, her voice dripping with pious judgment. 31, and no husband, no children. The Lord has turned his face from her. She's impure. Clara squeezed her eyes shut. She held the counter, her knuckles white. They say Thorne is a killer. Mrs., Davies whispered, loud enough for the whole store to hear. It figures he'd take up with a whore dressed as a bride, like calls to like. Whore, barren, impure. The words were stones, and they struck her, one by one. She fumbled in her pocket for the coins Elias had given her and threw them on the counter. She grabbed the sacks, ignoring the thread, and fled. She did not run, but her walk was a desperate, rigid stride. She heard them laughing as the door swung shut. She loaded the supplies onto Jericho, her hands trembling so badly she could barely tie the knots. She mounted the mule and rode out of town, not looking back. She made it halfway up the trail before she had to stop. She slid off the mule, stumbling into the tall pines by the creek. The shame was a physical sickness, a sour bile in her throat. She had thought she was stronger. She had thought the work, the sun, the quiet acceptance from Elias had burned away the stain. But it was still there. It was part of her. Spoiled. She hid her face in her hands. But she did not cry. The tears were frozen, locked behind a wall of humiliation. She just shook, a deep, silent ague of the soul. Elias knew the moment she rode in that something was wrong. She was too quiet, her face a pale, blank mask. She unloaded the supplies without a word, put the mule in the barn, and then she walked away. Not toward the cabin, toward the creek. He watched her go, a knot of unease tightening in his gut. He gave her time, an hour. But when she did not return as the sun began to dip, he followed. He found her in a small, rocky hollow where the creek pooled, deep and cold. She was on her knees on a flat stone. She was not washing clothes. She had a bar of lye soap, the harsh soap he used for scouring the barn, and she was scrubbing her own skin. Her arms were raw, red and bleeding. She was scrubbing her face, her neck, her hands, with a frantic, punishing energy. She was crying now, harsh, dry sobs that were torn from her throat. She was trying to wash it off. The words, the judgment, the stain of her past, the stain of their gossip. Elias stopped. The sight of it, it broke through his armor. This was not the quiet, sad weeping he had seen before. This was self-destruction. This was a soul trying to tear itself free from its own skin. "Clara!" His voice was rough. She startled, her hand flying to her mouth, the soap dropping into the water. She tried to hide her arms, to turn away, ashamed to be seen. "You'll draw blood," he said, his voice flat. It was not flat, it was tight, controlled. "It will not come off," she whispered, her voice a raw wound. "It will never come off." He walked to her. He did not kneel. He simply reached down and took the lye soap from the rock. He threw it far, into the trees. Then he took her arm. She flinched, but his grip was not cruel. It was firm. He examined her skin, the red, weeping scratches. He looked at her face, streaked with tears and soap, her eyes wide with a pain he was just beginning to understand. "Stop this," he said. It was an order, but it was also a plea. He pulled her to her feet. She was unsteady. He put one hand on her back, guiding her, and walked her back to the cabin. He sat her on the stool by the fire. He took the tin of salve and a clean rag. He knelt in front of her. "Give me your hands," he said. She held them out, trembling. They were worse than he thought. He gently, so gently, cleaned the blood and grit from her skin. He applied the salve, his rough, calloused thumbs moving over her wounds. He did not speak. He just tended to her. When he was done, he sat back on his heels. He looked up at her. That night, the silence in the cabin was different. It was not the silence of coexistence. It was the silence of a coming storm. Elias sat on his bedroll, cleaning his rifle, the oiled rag moving in steady, repetitive strokes. Clara sat on her cot, her bandaged hands in her lap. "Do you believe them?" she finally whispered. The rag stopped moving. "What?" "The women, in town." Her voice was dead, stripped of all emotion. "Do you believe what they say? That I am, what they called me, that I am impure, barren?" Elias put the rifle down. He looked at her, his gray eyes catching the firelight. He saw her, really saw her. Not just the woman who cooked his meals and mended his fences. He saw the strength it took for her to ride into that town. He saw the strength it took for her to survive her past, to survive this ranch, to survive him. He let out a breath, a low, rough sound. They do not know what strength looks like. Clara's head snapped up. She stared at him. It was not a denial. It was a validation. He had not said, "It is not true." He had said, "You are strong." The tears came again, but these were different. They were a release, a crack in the ice. She watched him for a long time. He had defended her. He had tended her wounds. He had offered her the only thing he possessed, his respect. She owed him the same. "What did you do, Elias?" she asked, her voice gaining a small measure of its own strength. "The town. They whisper. They say you are a killer. They say you have blood on your hands." He went still, his hands resting on the rifle stock, clenched. This was the wall, the one he never, ever let anyone near. "You do not want to know," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Yes," she said. She stood up from her cot and walked to the fire, sitting on the hearth rug, closer to him. She would not back down. Not now. "They say it. I want to hear it from you. You know my shame. I want to know yours." He looked at her, his face a torment. He wanted to tell her to go, to leave him to his ghosts. But her eyes were not full of judgment. They were just open, waiting. He began to speak. His voice was a rasp. The words pulled from a place he kept buried. "I had a brother, Samuel, younger than me." He stared into the flames. He was not like me. He was soft. He liked to whistle. He saw good in people. He married a woman, Hannah. They had a small place down in the territory. He paused, the silence stretching. There was a dispute over cattle. A man, a powerful man, accused Samuel of rustling. It was a lie. Samuel, he could not have, but it did not matter. The man rounded up his friends. They were drunk. They went to Samuel's cabin. Elias's breath hitched. They took him. Hannah, she tried to stop them. They hurt her. They set the cabin on fire. And they strung Samuel up from a cottonwood. They lynched him. Clara put her bandaged hand over her mouth. "I was 2 days' ride away," Elias continued, his voice dead. "By the time I got there, it was just ashes, and him." He stopped, his throat working. "I buried them, both of them, and I made a vow, on their graves. I found the names of every man who was there. There were 7 of them. Elias. I hunted them," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, a sound more terrifying than a shout. "It took me a year. I was not a soldier. This was not war. This was revenge. I found the first one in a saloon in Dodge City, the next in a mining camp in the high peaks. The last one was the man who accused him. I found him in St. Louis. He begged." Elias looked at his own hands, spread open before him. "I did not care. I killed them all. I did it slowly. I wanted them to know why. I wanted them to know whose name was on the bullet." He was breathing hard, the confession tearing him apart. "When it was done," he whispered, "I thought I would feel clean. I thought Samuel would be at peace, but I felt nothing, just empty. The man I was, he died with Samuel. The thing that came back, that was just me." He looked at Clara, his eyes full of a profound, bottomless self-loathing. "They are right, the whispers. I am a killer. My hands are not meant for gentleness. They are not meant for holding anything. They are meant to destroy. That is all I am good for." The cabin was silent. The fire crackled. Clara looked at his hands. They were large, scarred, calloused from work and, yes, from violence. She saw the hands that had killed 7 men. She also saw the hands that had laid a coat over her shoulders, the hands that had pulled a calf from the cold, the hands that had, so gently, tended her own bleeding skin. She moved, crawling the small distance between them. She knelt in front of him, and she took his hands in hers. Elias flinched, tried to pull away. "Clara, no." "Yes," she said, her voice shaking but firm. Her bandaged palms pressed against his. Her gaze did not waver. She looked him in the eye, seeing all the pain, all the blood, all the grief, and she did not look away. "They are not just for destroying," she said. "Then let them hold something good. At last." He stared at her, his throat thick. No one had touched him, not with kindness, in a decade. No one had looked at his stain and not recoiled. She was holding his guilt, his past, in her own wounded hands, and she was not letting go. Something inside him, something that had been frozen for years, broke. He leaned forward, his movement slow, painful, hesitant. He was giving her every chance to pull away. She did not. She met him halfway. Their first kiss was not soft. It was not a kiss of romance. It was a kiss of pure, desperate longing. It was clumsy and pained. It tasted of salt, her tears and his. It was a collision of two broken, lonely souls who did not believe they deserved a moment of grace. His rough beard scraped her chin. Her hands tightened on his. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. His breath was a ragged shudder. "Clara!" "Hush," she whispered. She kissed him again, more softly this time. A kiss of acceptance. Neither of them believed they were worthy of it, but neither of them pulled away. A week passed. The confession. The kiss. It had changed everything. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was full. It was charged with a new, terrifying intimacy. He would watch her. She would watch him. A brush of hands at the table was a jolt. He had moved her cot. It was now next to his bedroll. They did not speak of it. They just were together. The spring nights were warm now, the air soft and smelling of pine and new grass. The cabin felt small, stifling. One night, Elias took 2 bedrolls and laid them outside, under the vast, open sky. The stars were a river of diamonds, so bright they seemed to be humming. He lay down. Clara lay down beside him. They were not touching, but the space between them was a thin, electric line. She lay on her back, watching the stars. She thought of his confession. She thought of her own. Barren, impure, a killer. 2 people, cast off by the world. She turned her head to look at him. He was a dark shape, his profile stark against the star field. He was staring up, his jaw set. He was strong. He was a survivor. He was a good man, buried beneath a mountain of grief. She thought of what the women had said. Barren, a life ending, a line stopping. She looked at him, and a fierce, trembling wave of emotion rose in her. It was not just love. It was hope. It was a desperate plea for life, for continuity, for something good to come from all this pain. She reached out, her hand finding his. He flinched. Then his fingers closed around hers, a rough, warm grip. She moved closer, laying her head on his shoulder. He tensed. Then, slowly, his arm came around her, pulling her against his side. She could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart beneath her ear. She trembled, the words building in her throat, a truth so powerful it frightened her. "Elias," she whispered, "I am here. A strong cowboy like you." Her voice broke. She took a breath. A strong cowboy like you should pass on his genes. He went utterly still. He understood what she was saying. It was not a request for a child. She believed that was impossible. It was a plea that his strength, his line, his life should not end here, on this lonely mountain. It was the most profound expression of faith in him she could offer. He held her tighter, his face turned up to the stars. His throat was too thick to speak. There were no vows. There were no promises of a future they both knew was uncertain. They had Amos Vane, they had the town, they had their own ghosts. But tonight, they had this. He held her close. There was just the sound of their breathing, the vast, cold starlight, and the stubborn, shared fact of their survival. The night they slept beneath the stars changed the air in the cabin. The unspoken had been given a name. The distance Elias had fiercely guarded was breached, not by an attack, but by a quiet, trembling admission. He did not, however, become a different man. He was still Elias Thorne. He was still silent, his face carved from the same hard granite as the mountains. But the silence had shifted. It was no longer an empty void, but a space they shared. He began by dismantling her cot. Clara was scrubbing the breakfast skillet when he picked up the small, rickety frame and carried it outside. She said nothing, watching him, her heart a sudden, fast drumbeat. He did not store it in the barn. He began to break it apart, stacking the wood neatly by the chopping block. She came to the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "What are you doing?" Elias did not look at her. He tested a cracked leg of the cot, then snapped it over his knee. It was in the way. Need the space. He finished the job, then came back inside, brushing splinters from his hands. He jested, not to his narrow bedroll, but to the straw mattress on its low-built frame, the one he had always used. It was wider than a cot, but it was not a bed for two, not comfortably. "It's warmer," he said, his voice flat, as if discussing the weather. "The nights are still cold." It was not an invitation. It was a statement of fact, a decision he had made. That night was more terrifying for her than the blizzard. She lay down on the mattress, stiff as a plank, her back to him. He lay beside her, equally rigid, their bodies separated by a 6-inch canyon of raw, awkward intimacy. She could feel the heat of him, smell the faint, clean scent of lye soap and pine. She did not sleep. She listened to him breathe, listened to him not sleeping. In the morning, they rose, and nothing was said, but the cot was gone. She had a place. A few nights later, he sat by the fire, a block of pine and his sharpest knife in his hands. He was carving, the chips falling in a pale, fragrant pile. She was mending his shirt, the needle moving in and out, the silence comfortable. He worked for hours, patient, his hands, which she had seen kill, moving with a surprising, careful grace. She thought he was making a tool, perhaps a new latch. When he was done, he stood up, brushing the chips from his trousers. He walked over to her and dropped the object in her lap. It was a comb. It was not fancy. It was simple, solid, the wood grain flowing smoothly. He had sanded it with river grit until it was as smooth as polished stone. The teeth were even, strong. It was beautiful. She looked up at him, her throat thick, a gift, a thing with no purpose other than to be for her, to touch her hair. "It will not pull," he said gruffly, and turned away to check the bar on the door. He began to teach her to shoot. The threat from Amos Vane was a low vibration they both felt, a storm building just over the horizon. Elias would not, could not, be the only one who could defend their land. He took her out to the pasture, his heavy rifle in hand. "You need to know this," he said. He placed the rifle in her hands. The weight of it staggered her. It was cold, oily metal, a thing made for one purpose. "It's too heavy," she said, her arms trembling. "The world is heavy," he answered. "Hold it steady. Put the stock to your shoulder. Tight." He stood behind her, his body pressed against her back, his arms coming around her to guide her grip. His chest was a solid wall. She could feel his breath on her hair. The touch that had once made him recoil was now purposeful, steadying. "Do not aim," he said, his voice a low rumble in her ear. "Just see the can on the fence post. Line up the sight. Do not pull the trigger. Squeeze it. Slow. Let it surprise you." She did. Her eyes watered. She held her breath. She squeezed. The explosion was a physical blow. The rifle kicked back, slamming into her shoulder, sending a shock through her whole body. She cried out, stumbling back into him. He caught her, holding her upright. "You missed," he said, not unkindly. "You flinched. Do it again." She did it again, and again. Her shoulder was a purple, aching bruise, but on the 7th shot, The can jumped from the post and spun into the dust. A small, shocked laugh escaped her. She had done it. She turned to look at him, her face bright with a strange, fierce pride. Elias was not smiling, but his eyes were soft. He nodded. Just once. Again, he said. While he taught her to defend, she taught herself to build. She took the small patch of hard-baked earth by the cabin door, the place the sun struck first in the morning. She used his spade, breaking the soil, her hands, now calloused, working with a steady rhythm. He watched her, confused. That's not good land for planting. The water won't stay. It's not for food, she replied, not looking up. She went to the meadow where he had taken her, the one high on the ridge. She carefully dug up wild columbine, their roots deep. She found patches of bright, red paintbrush and pale, sweet mountain primrose. She carried them back, her skirt full of dirt and roots, and she planted them. It was a hopeless, defiant patch of color against the gray cabin and the brown, unforgiving land. She was reclaiming. She was putting down her own roots. This was her land, too. Elias watched her carry water to it every evening. He thought it was a fool's errand. The wind would tear them. The first frost would kill them. But he did not stop her. One morning, she came outside to find a low, rough border of stones placed around her garden. Elias was already out, mending the corral, his back to her, as if he had nothing to do with it. The peace was broken by the sound of shod horses. It was mid-morning. Elias was at the woodpile, his axe in mid-swing. He stopped, the axe held low, his body utterly still. Clara came to the cabin door. 4 riders came up the trail. They were not cowboys. They wore long, trail-worn dusters, and their guns were holstered low and tied down. They moved with a lazy, predatory arrogance. The man in the lead was thin, with a pale face and colorless eyes. He reined in his horse, his gaze sweeping over the ranch, the new fence, the patched roof, the mule, and finally, Clara. Elias Thorne, the man said. It was not a question. Elias leaned his axe against the chopping block. He wiped his hands on his trousers, his rifle just inside the cabin door. A single, calculated step away. You're on private land. This land is a matter of discussion, the man said. He smiled, but it was just a baring of teeth. Name's Quinn. I represent Mr. Amos Vane. I'm sure you heard of him. I've heard, Elias said. Mr. Vane is consolidating his holdings. He's buying up this range. He likes things tidy. He's authorized me to offer you $500 for this. Patch of rock, cash, today. It's not for sale. Quinn's smile widened. That's what the Miller place said. That's what the widow Jessup said. They changed their minds. Mr. Vane is a patient man, but his patience has an end. He gets what he wants. Thorne. He's got the law on his side. And when the law's not looking, he's got us. Then he won't mind me keeping what's mine, Elias said, his voice flat. Quinn's gaze slid past him, to Clara. He looked her up and down, a slow, insolent appraisal that made her skin crawl. Nice setup you got. Quiet. Got yourself a woman, too. She come with the deed? Elias' hand tightened into a fist. You got 5 seconds to ride out. Before I forget, you're just a messenger. Quinn chuckled, but one of the other men, a heavy-set man with a drinker's face, was squinting at Clara. He pushed his hat back. Well, I'll be. The man, Flag, said, his voice a wet rasp. I know you. Clara felt her blood turn to ice. She took a step back, her hand clutching the doorframe. It could not be. Flag grinned, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. That's Clara Middleton. From back in Ohio, my cousin used to work in the same house, the one she got tossed out of. Quinn looked at his man, interested. Is that so, Flag? Oh, yeah, Flag said. His eyes locked on Clara's terrified face. He was enjoying this. She wasn't just tossed out. Boss, old man Hemlock. He bought her, paid her family a good price to keep quiet after he was done with her. She's used goods. Paid for, ain't that right? Clara! The pantry, the torn dress, the shame. It was here. It had followed her across the country. And it was standing in her yard. Elias did not know the details of her story, but he knew this was the heart of her shame. He took the one step to the doorway, his hand grabbing the rifle. "Get off my land, now!" Quinn held up a hand, his pale eyes shining with a new, cruel understanding. He had found a lever. "That's the way of it. Thorn? Shacked up with bought property? You got a taste for other men's leavings?" Elias raised the rifle. "Easy, friend," Quinn said, backing his horse up. "We're just talking business. But you think on it. 500. The offer's good till the season ends. After that, well, accidents happen. Fences break. Springs go sour." He looked at Clara, his smile a scar. "Things get misplaced." They turned their horses, slow and arrogant, and rode away. The sound of Flag's laughter hung in the air long after they were gone. Elias stood for a long minute, his rifle held at his side. The air was poisoned. He could feel Clara shaking behind him. "Clara!" She did not answer. She turned and fled into the dark of the cabin, her back rigid, her shame a palpable thing. The rumor spread through Junction like a grass fire. Flag had ridden straight to the saloon, bought a bottle, and told his story to anyone who would listen. It was a good story. It was ugly, and it confirmed every suspicion the townswomen had ever had. A week later, they needed supplies. They had to go. Elias would not let her go alone. Not now. They rode in together, Jericho and the roan, side by side. It was Sunday. The town was quiet, the citizens dressed in their Sabbath best. As Elias and Clara rode down the main street, the talking stopped. Doors closed. People on the boardwalk froze, turning to stare. It was not the curious whispering of before. It was a cold, open, unified judgment. A small boy, no more than 8, pointed. "That's her. That's the whore." His mother grabbed his arm, but she did not scold him. She just pulled him inside. Clara's face was white. She kept her eyes fixed on Jericho's ears. As they passed the small white church, children, braver in a pack, gathered. One of them, egged on by the others, picked up a small stone. He threw it. It landed in the dust at Clara's feet. Elias reined in his horse, his body going rigid. Another boy, bolder, threw his... It struck the hem of her boot with a dull thwack. Clara flinched, her hands tightening on the reins. The adults, clustered on the church steps, watched. They did nothing. The preacher, Mr. Davies, stepped forward, his face a mask of pious disapproval. "Miss Middleton," he called out, his voice carrying in the dead silence. He used her maiden name, a deliberate, public erasure of her new life. Clara was forced to look at him. "This is a house of God, ma'am," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "We cannot, in good conscience, welcome your kind here. It would upset the moral fiber of the congregation." I only came for supplies," Clara whispered. Her voice choked. "Hatcher's is closed on the Lord's Day." The preacher said, as if to a simpleton, "You and him, you bring a shadow to this town. I suggest you move on." Elias swung down from his horse. He did not run, he did not charge. He just moved. He walked through the crowd of children who scattered like quail. He walked up the church steps. The preacher, who was a small, fussy man, suddenly seemed to realize his mistake. He was facing a man who was not a member of his flock. He was facing Elias Thorne. Elias stopped one step below the preacher, so they were eye to eye. He was a foot taller. He was made of iron and rage. He did not draw his gun. He did not need to. His presence was a threat. He spoke, his voice a low, cold gravel that only the preacher could hear. "Preacher," Mr. Davies swallowed, his face pale. "Now, Thorne, this is a house of—" "You talk of God," Elias whispered. "You know what God does to liars? You know what he thinks of men who hide behind a cross? I'm a man of God." Elias's hand came up. He did not strike. He did not push. He laid his open palm flat on the preacher's chest. It was an immense, controlled weight. The preacher's breath caught. He could not move. "You let your wife spread filth," Elias said, his voice deadly calm. "You let your children throw stones. You're a weak man, preacher, a coward, and you're hiding." The preacher's eyes were wide with terror. "You will not speak her name again. You will not look at her again. You will tell your sheep to heal, or I will come back, and I will not be here to pray." He took his hand away. The preacher sagged against the church door. Gasping, Elias turned, his face a mask of stone. He walked back to Clara. He grabbed her arm, his grip hard. "We're leaving." He did not ride back to the mercantile. He did not ride back to the ranch. He turned his horse and rode up, into the high country, pulling Jericho's reins, leading her away from the town, away from their home. "Elias, where are we going?" she cried. He did not answer. He just rode, his back straight, pulling her deeper into the wilderness. He took her to a place she had never been. A high, hidden meadow, a perfect bowl of green grass and wildflowers, protected on all sides by aspen and pine. As they broke through the trees, a herd of wild mustangs grazing in the center threw up their heads. They were beautiful, wild, free creatures. They stared, the stallion snorting, and then they bolted, a thunder of hooves, vanishing into the trees. Elias swung off his horse. He walked to Clara and pulled her down. The moment her feet touched the ground, she broke. The shame, the stones, the preacher's voice, Flag's laugh. It all crashed down. She collapsed to her knees in the tall grass and sobbed. It was not a quiet weeping. It was an ugly, broken, soul-deep cry of despair. "It's true," she choked out, her hands clawing at the dirt. "Don't you see? It's true. I am that. I am the whore, the bought woman. I've ruined you. I've stained you, this land, everything." Elias let her cry. He stood over her, his legs braced. A guardian. He let her empty herself of the poison. When her sobs finally quieted to ragged, shuddering breaths, he crouched in front of her. He did not touch her gently. He grabbed her chin, his grip firm, forcing her to look up, to see him. His eyes were burning. "Do you see them?" he growled, nodding to the empty space where the horses had been. "They run, they fight, they live. Do you see the town looking at them? Do you see the preacher casting stones at them? No." He shook her, just once. "Because they do not care. They are free. Their worth ain't decided by insects like that, by worms like Davies and Flag." His voice was raw, breaking with an emotion she had never heard from him. "Let them talk. Let them whisper. Let them throw their stones. Let them watch you live." His words struck her. Let them watch you live. It was not a comfort. It was a command. It was an absolution. She looked at him, her face streaked with tears and dirt. She saw him, her protector, her partner, the man who had faced down her past and his own. She reached up, her hands tangling in the front of his shirt, and pulled him down. He kissed her. It was not the hesitant, painful kiss of their first intimacy. This was raw, hungry, and full of rage. It was a kiss of grief and defiance. It was a claiming. They made love there, in the high meadow, with the sun beating down and the wild wind in the pines. It was not gentle. It was not soft. It was a desperate, necessary act. It was two people, branded as outcasts, taking back their own lives. It was a consecration. They were washing away the filth of the town, the shame of their pasts, in the sun and the wind. It was not a sin. It was an act of survival, an act of living. After, they lay in the tangled grass, the world quiet, the horses gone. Clara's breathing was deep and even. She was asleep, her face finally at peace, her head on his chest. Elias held her, stroking her hair. He looked up at the vast, empty blue sky. He had never, in his entire life, felt what he felt now. It was not peace, it was terror. He had faced down the town. He had faced down her shame. But as he lay there, holding the only good thing he had ever had. A new, cold fear settled in his gut. He used to fear his past. He used to fear the ghosts of the men he had killed. Now, he feared the future. Vane's men, they knew her story. They knew she was not just a hired hand. They knew she was his. They knew she was his weakness. He had always feared his own darkness would destroy her. Now, he was terrified the world would use her to destroy him. He feared they would take her, by force. And he feared, even more, that one day she would believe the lies, that she would believe she was a stain, and that she would leave him. Not out of fear, but out of a mistaken belief that she was saving him. He held her tighter, the sun warm on his back, and felt the chill of that shadow. He would not let her go. The fragile peace held for 3 weeks. It was a time of small, quiet discoveries. Elias learned the way she hummed when she weeded her hopeless garden. She learned he slept on his left side, and that he drank his coffee so hot it should have burned him. They lived inside the small, warm circle they had drawn against the world. Then the world came for them. It was Sheriff Brody again. He rode up the trail, his horse sweating, and he did not look Clara in the eye. He held a folded piece of paper in his hand as if it were a snake. "Elias," he said, his voice heavy with defeat. I got an official notice from the territorial court in Denver." Elias stopped his work at the corral, his hammer held low. He knew. "Say it." "It's a deed of sale," Brody said, unfolding the paper. "Filed 3 days ago. Says you sold this ranch, this whole quarter section, to the Red Rock Holdings Company. That's Vane's company." Clara came to the cabin door, her hands twisting in her apron. "It's a lie," Elias said, his voice deadly quiet. "I signed nothing." "I know it, Elias," Brody said, his voice miserable. "But it's legal. On its face, it's got a signature. It says you sold it 2 months ago, in absentia. It claims you abandoned the property, that you were just squatting here, that you sold your rights for cash in Denver." "Abandoned?" Elias looked around, his gaze falling on the new flowers by the door, the mended fence, the woman in the doorway. "He's a liar. He's a liar with a judge in his pocket," Brody said. "They used the town gossip against you. They're claiming this woman." He nodded at Clara. "Is proof that you ain't of sound mind, that you're unstable." The word hung in the air. A vile, poisonous thing. They were using her shame, as a weapon to steal his land. "I have my original deed," Elias said, turning for the cabin. "The one I filed in Junction. It's in the box." "Elias, that won't matter if the Denver court overrides it." Brody pleaded. "Vane's men, Quinn and that other one, Flag, they're in town, flashing this paper. They say they're coming tomorrow to take possession. I cannot stop them. Officially. The land is theirs. They are not taking it." Elias emerged from the cabin, his face a mask of cold iron. He had his original deed in one hand, his rifle in the other. "Elias, do not ride into town," Clara said, grabbing his arm. Her voice was sharp with fear. "It's what they want. It's a trap." "If I stay here, they win," he said, his voice low. "They bring the law with them. I have to fight this with the law. I'll show this to the assessor. I'll show it to Hatcher. I will prove I never left." "It is not about proof. It is about them wanting to get you off this mountain." He looked at her. He put his hand on her cheek, his rough thumb brushing her skin. It was a gesture so open, so full of a future he was fighting for, that it broke her heart. "Bar the door," he said. "Do not open it. Do not come out. Shoot anything that is not me." He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was hard, fast, and desperate. A promise. He swung up onto his roan, turned the horse, and rode down the trail, his back straight, his rifle in its scabbard. Clara stood in the yard until he was a small speck in the distance. The sun was high. He would be back by nightfall. She barred the door. The afternoon crawled by, each minute a separate, agonizing hour. The silence of the mesa was no longer peaceful. It was a held breath. Clara sat at the table, Elias's heavy rifle across her lap, watching the square of sunlight move across the floor. He should have been back by sundown. The sun touched the western peaks, and the high country was plunged into the cold, purple shadow. He was not back. She lit the lantern, her hands shaking. He was a smart man. A fighter. He would not be taken easily. Perhaps he had to argue with the assessor. Perhaps he was staying the night. But she knew. In her bones, she knew. This was the trap she had seen. At 9 o'clock, the wolves began to sing, their voices close. She stood up. She could not wait. To wait was to accept. She put on his heavy coat, the one he had given her that first night. She took the rifle. She went to the barn, her heart a cold stone. She saddled Jericho, the mule, who huffed in protest. "Hush, old man," she whispered. "We have to find him." She rode down the trail, the lantern swaying, casting wild, dancing shadows that looked like men. Every snap of a twig was a rifle shot. Every gust of wind was a cruel laugh. She found his horse first. The roan was 3 miles from the cabin, standing by the side of the trail. Its reins broken, its flank covered in mud. It was grazing, unbothered. "Elias!" she screamed, her voice thin and small in the vast, cold dark. "Elias!" No answer, just the wind in the pines. She dismounted, her legs shaking so badly she could barely stand. She tied Jericho to a tree and raised the lantern. She saw the tracks. A scuffle, the deep, torn earth of a fight, and drag marks leading off the trail, down toward the creek. She followed them, the rifle heavy in her arms. "Elias!" A sound, a low moan, like an animal caught in a trap. She found him in a shallow, rocky ravine, half in, half out of the freezing water. He had been dumped, left for the wolves. "Oh, God," she whispered. She dropped the lantern, its light falling across him. He was a ruin. His face was a swollen, unrecognizable mask of blood and bruises. His shirt was torn open, his chest a geography of dark, deep wounds. He was not moving, save for the shallow, rattling breath that caused the moan. They had not shot him. They had wanted to break him, to beat him to death with fists and clubs. "Elias." She fell to her knees beside him, her hands hovering, afraid to touch him. "Elias, I am here." His eyes fluttered, but they did not see her. "Clara, trap," he whispered, his voice a wet rasp. I know. Hush, I have you." Panic, cold and sharp, rose in her throat. She had to get him home. He was a big man. She could not lift him. She ran back to the mule. She untied the heavy rope from the saddle. She half ran, half slid back to the ravine. He was unconscious now. She worked, her breath coming in sobs. She looped the rope under his arms, her hands sinking into the cold mud and his own blood. She tied it. She climbed back to Jericho and wrapped the rope around the saddle horn. "Pull, old man." She wept, pulling on the mule's bridle. "Pull, please." Jericho strained. She pulled with him. They dragged Elias, an inert, heavy weight, from the ravine. It was a horrible, scraping sound. Getting him onto the mule's back was a nightmare. She had to use a low boulder as a step, hauling his dead weight, lifting, crying, pushing. He moaned, a high, thin sound of pure agony. She finally got him draped over the saddle, face down, like a sack of feed. She took the roan's reins and tied them to Jericho. She held Elias in place with one hand, the rifle in the other, and she began the 3-mile walk back up the mountain. In the dark, the wolves howling, her husband dying on her mule. It was almost dawn when she got him back. She dragged him from the mule, across the yard, and into the cabin. She could not lift him onto their bed. She left him on his bedroll by the fire, where he had slept that first night. She tore his clothes from him, cutting the bloody fabric with her knife. She saw the full extent of the damage. His ribs were broken. She could feel the splintered ends move under his skin. His left arm was bent at a wrong angle, and the gash on his head, just above the temple, was deep. matted with blood and dirt. She was alone, utterly, terribly alone. She became a different person. The weeping, frightened woman was gone. A cold, hard efficiency took her place. She boiled water. She took her mending kit. She found his bottle of whiskey. She washed his wounds, her touch gentle but firm, wincing as he groaned. She took her smallest needle, a strong thread, and she began to stitch the gash on his head. She pushed the needle through his skin. She pulled it tight. She did it again and again. Her own hands were steady. She set his arm. She had seen her father do it to a farmhand once. She pulled, hard, until she felt the sickening, soft thump of the bone settling. He screamed, a choked, unconscious sound, and she clapped a hand over her own mouth to keep from screaming with him. She splinted it with pieces of the cot he had broken apart. She wrapped his ribs, tightly, with torn strips of sheeting. Then she sat and she waited. For 2 days, he did not wake. He burned with fever. She was his only defense. The ranch was her prison and her fortress. The isolation was a living thing. She did the chores in a haze of terror. She milked the cow, her ears strained, the rifle leaning against the barn door. She fed the horses. She checked the ridgeline every 10 minutes. She was being watched. She could feel it. Quinn and Flag, they were waiting for her to flee, waiting for him to die. She had to hunt. They needed food. She took the rifle, the one he had taught her to use, and stalked the woods behind the cabin. She missed a rabbit. She cried in frustration. She reloaded. She saw another. She held the stock tight to her shoulder, just as he had shown her. Squeeze. Let it surprise you. She fired. She killed it. She carried it back, her hands bloody, and she made a thin, hot broth, forcing it between Elias's cracked lips. On the 3rd day, the fever was worse. The head wound was red, inflamed. He was dying. She could not do it alone. She made a choice. She left him. She locked the door, took Jericho, and rode. Not toward Junction, but east, 5 miles, to the dried-up creek bed where the only other human being in 20 miles lived. Widow Albright. She was a woman as tough and withered as the land. An outcast who spoke to no one. The town believed she was half mad. Clara found her splitting wood, her arms as thin and strong as steel cables. "He's dying," Clara said, her voice a raw croak. "Elias, they beat him. He has a fever." The widow looked at her for a long, silent minute. "I heard," she said. "Heard Vane's men killed him. He's not dead, but he will be. Please, I do not know what else to do." Widow Albright dropped her axe. "Get me my bag." She was a miracle. She came back to the cabin, looked at Elias, and clicked her tongue. "He's a strong one. Stupid, but strong." She made a poultice of herbs and boiled leaves, a foul-smelling green paste. She undid Clara's neat stitches, cleaned the wound with something that made Elias shudder, and packed it with the paste. She sat with Clara, drinking coffee. The widow looked at the exhausted younger woman, at her burned hands from the hunt, at her wide, terrified eyes. "Men like him," the widow said, her voice like stones in a dry creek bed. "They're all iron and rage. They eat themselves alive from the inside out. They die fast, or they love deep. There ain't no in-between." She looked straight at Clara. "You better decide what you want." "I want him to live." Clara whispered, "That ain't what I asked." The widow said, "Dying fast is easy. Lovin' deep. That's the hard part. That's the part that costs. You ready to pay? 'Cause Vane ain't done. He'll be back, and you're what he'll come for." The widow left, leaving the poultice and a small bag of herbs. "Boil these, keep him warm, and keep that rifle loaded." The fever broke that night. The terrible dry heat left him. He fell into a deep, healing sleep. But with the sleep came the dreams. He was not in the cabin. He was back in the fire. "Samuel!" he cried out, his hands clenched, his body rigid. "Hannah, run! The door! I cannot get to the door!" He thrashed, his splinted arm striking the wall. He was fighting, lost in his own past. Clara rushed to him, held him down. "Elias, it is a dream. Wake up. I am here. It is Clara." He did not see her. His eyes were wide, staring at a ghost. "Blood. So much. My fault. My fault. Hannah, I left you." He was retreating. He was leaving her, falling back into the guilt that had defined him. She was losing him, not to the fever, but to the past. She shook him, her hands on his shoulders. "Elias, do not leave me. You cannot leave me here." She was sobbing, her own terror pouring out. "I do not care what you did. I do not care who you were. You stay with me, even if I am barren, even if I am what they say. I will carry your name. I will carry your grief. I will carry your hope. I will carry whatever part of you will give me. But you cannot leave me alone." Her voice, raw and desperate, cut through the nightmare. His eyes, wild and lost, slowly focused. He saw her, Clara, her face streaked with tears, her hair undone, her eyes full of a fierce, demanding love. He was weak, so weak. He lifted his good hand, his fingers barely grazing her cheek. "You," he rasped. "You already have it." His hand fell, his eyes closed. He was asleep, but it was a true sleep. He was with her. She slept, slumped in the chair beside him, her hand on his chest. She was woken by a different sound, not a moan, not the wind, a crackle, and the sharp, acrid smell of smoke. She was on her feet in an instant. She looked through the window. Her heart stopped. The barn was on fire. A torch had been thrown onto its roof. "No," she whispered. She ran to the door. 2 men on horseback were silhouetted against the flames. Flag and another. They were laughing. "The animals!" She did not grab the rifle. She ran, screaming, to the barn. The horses, terrified, were kicking the stalls. She ripped the bar from the door, and the roan and Jericho bolted out into the night, their eyes white. But Stubbs, the calf, he was in the back, bleeding, trapped. The hay was catching. The roof was a sheet of flame. "Clara!" She ignored the call. She ran into the burning building. The smoke was a solid, choking thing. She found the calf, huddled in the corner. She grabbed it, pulling it, pushing it. A beam, burning, crashed down, blocking the main door. She ran to the small side door, dragging the animal. She pushed it through and used her own body to shield it as a section of the roof collapsed, sending a shower of burning embers over her. She fell out into the yard, scorched, sobbing, but the calf was safe. She looked up. The men were laughing, holding another torch. They were going to throw it on the cabin. "Clara!" The voice was not a whisper. It was a roar. Elias was in the doorway. He was not on the bed. He was standing. He was wrapped in bloody bandages, his splinted arm strapped to his chest. In his good hand, he held the rifle. He was a specter, a ghost of vengeance, risen from the grave. His face was a terrible, cold mask of death. He raised the rifle. His hand, she saw, was perfectly steady. He was the man who had hunted 7 men. He was going to kill them. Flag's laughter died. He saw the ghost. He fumbled for his own gun. "Elias, no!" Clara ran, stumbling, and threw herself in front of him. She grabbed the hot barrel of the rifle. "Get out of the way!" he hissed, his voice a sound from a tomb. He tried to push her. "No!" she cried, clinging to the gun. Look at me, Elias! They burned our home," he choked out, the rage giving him a terrible, false strength. "They burned a building, that is all. If you kill them, if you fight like them, we lose, they win. They make you the monster they say you are. We lose." He struggled against her, his eyes locked on Flag. The killer in him was screaming. It was so easy. 1 shot, 2, justice. "We lose," she said again, her voice breaking. "Please, Elias, stay with me. Stay. This is not you." He looked at her smoke-stained, tear-streaked face. He looked at the burning barn. He looked at the rifle, the tool of his old life. And he looked back at her, his partner, his life. The strength, the rage, the vengeance, it all poured out of him. The rifle sagged, its weight suddenly too much. He lowered it. He leaned his forehead against hers, and a sound was torn from his chest. A deep, agonizing sob. He was not sobbing for the barn. He was sobbing for his brother, for his lost soul, for the fact that he had almost thrown it all away. He collapsed against her, his strength gone. She held him up, her arms wrapped around him, the rifle trapped between them. The two men, terrified by the ghost and his wife, fired a single, wild shot into the air and spurred their horses, disappearing into the dark. Clara stood in the yard, holding her broken husband, as their barn burned to the ground. The sun rose on a world of ash. The barn was a black, smoking skeleton, the smell of its death sharp in the cold morning air. Elias sat on the cabin step, his bandaged body rigid, his good hand clenched on the rifle he had not fired. He was weak, his breath shallow, but the fever in his eyes had been replaced by a cold, hard clarity. Clara came out, her face smudged with soot, her hair still smelling of smoke. She carried 2 cups of coffee, setting one beside him. She said nothing. There was nothing to say that the ruin in their yard did not. He had almost done it. He had almost become the monster they all claimed he was. Her voice, her words, "If we fight like them, we lose," had been the only thing to pull him back from the edge. "They will be back," he said, his voice a raw rasp. "Yes," she said. "They will not stop, not now. They think because I did not shoot. I am weak." "Are you?" she asked, looking at him. He met her gaze. "No, I am not." He used the cabin wall to pull himself to his feet, grunting with the pain in his ribs. He was a wreck, held together with bandages and willpower. "We are going to town." Clara's heart tightened. "Elias, you can barely stand. It's what they want. They will finish what they started." "No," he said. He walked, unsteady, to the water barrel and splashed his face. "We are not going to fight them, not their way. We are going to do what you said. We are going to live, but we are going to live on our land. They used lies. We will use the truth. They will not listen to us. So, they might listen to others." He looked at her, a new, hard determination in his bruised face. "They might listen to the widow Albright, and they will listen to Sutton." The ride to town was an agony. Elias was strapped onto his roan, his splinted arm tied to his chest, his rifle in its scabbed. Clara rode Jericho, her own rifle loaded and resting across her lap. They were a grim, battered pair. They did not go to Junction first. They rode east, to the widow's shack. She was outside, feeding her chickens, and looked up as they approached. She saw the smoking ruin on the horizon. She saw the set of Elias's jaw. "So," she said, her voice dry, "you are not dead." "Not yet," Elias rasped. "I am going to see the sheriff. I'm going to tell him what happened. I need a witness, one who saw what they did to me." The widow scattered the last of her feed. She looked at Clara, and a flicker of something, respect, passed through her cold eyes. "You decided you wanted him to love deep, did you? It's a costly choice. Will you come?" Clara asked. The widow sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. "Town folks spit when I walk by. They will not listen to a mad old woman. They will listen to someone who is not afraid of Amos Vane." Elias said. She stared at him, then nodded once. "I will come. It is time someone spoke up. Vane's been squeezing us all." She went inside to fetch her bonnet. Their next stop was the smithy. Matthias Sutton was a large, quiet man, his arms thick as fence posts. He was shaping a horseshoe, the ring of his hammer a steady rhythm in the town. He stopped when he saw them, his eyes widening at Elias's state. "Thorne! My God! What happened?" "Vane's men," Elias said, his voice tight with pain. "They beat me, left me for dead. Then they burned my barn. They are trying to run me off with a forged deed." Sutton put his hammer down. He had seen the deed, posted by Quinn in the saloon. He had known then. "The signature. It's wrong," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I knew it was wrong." "I am going to the sheriff." Elias said, "I need you to say that aloud." Sutton looked at his forge. Speaking against Vane could mean his own ruin. Vane's men bought supplies. They could make trouble. He looked back at Elias, a man he had traded with for years, a man who always paid his debts and never spoke an ill word. He looked at Clara, who stood by her husband, her face pale but resolute. "They burned your barn," Sutton said. It was a statement of fact, but it held a deep, slow-burning anger. "I will be there." When they entered the main street of Junction, it was midday. The town stopped. People came out of the mercantile, out of the saloon, to stare. This was not the ghost of the Mesa. This was a man of flesh and blood, brutalized, his face a swollen map of purple and black, his arm in a sling, his cabin clearly visible on the horizon, a plume of smoke still rising from its ruin. And beside him, her head high, was the woman they had scorned. Elias did not look at them. He walked, each step a carefully controlled agony, straight to the sheriff's office. Clara was at his side, her hand on his back, steadying him. Widow Albright and Sutton followed, a small, strange army of outcasts. The door to the office was open. Sheriff Brody was at his desk. Quinn and Flagg were there, their boots up on his table, drinking his coffee. They laughed when they saw Elias. "Well, look here," Quinn said, his voice lazy. "The ghost walked in, or limped in. Thought you'd be halfway to the territories by now. Thorn." "I am here for my land," Elias said, his voice weak but carrying in the silence. "You ain't got no land," Flagg sneered. "We filed the deed. It's Vane's. We're taking possession today. You filed a forgery." Elias said. He laid his original deed on the desk. "And you tried to murder me to keep me from saying so." Quinn's smile faded. He looked at Brody. "Sheriff, are you going to listen to this? The man's delirious. He's unstable. We told you. Probably fell off his horse in a drunken rage." "Is that so?" The voice was like rocks in a tin cup. Widow Albright stepped forward, pushing past Elias. She stared at Quinn, her eyes bright and fierce. "I tended his wounds. I am not a doctor, but I know what a club does to a man's ribs. I know what a boot does to a man's face. He has 3 ribs cracked, a broken ulna, and a head wound that would have killed a lesser man. That was no fall. Sheriff, that was an ambush. An attempted murder." The townspeople were crowding the boardwalk now, listening. Preacher Davies and his wife, Martha, were at the front, their faces pale. "That's just the word of a crazy old woman," Quinn spat. "And what of my word?" Matthias Sutton stepped in, his huge frame filling the doorway. He picked up the forged deed. He held it up to the light. "I am a blacksmith. I work with marks. I've seen Elias Thorne's signature on my ledgers for 6 years. I know his hand. This," he tapped the paper, "is a forgery, and a poor one at that. The loop is wrong. He does not cross his T like that. This is a lie." The crowd murmured. Sutton was a respected man. He was not a ghost. He was not a mad woman. Quinn was on his feet now, his hand moving toward his gun. "This is legal, filed in Denver. You cannot—" "And the fire," Clara's voice, clear and strong, cut through his— She stepped forward. Flagg looked at her, his sneer returning. "What about it, sweetheart? Barns burn, especially when folks are careless." "You did it," Clara said, her voice trembling but not breaking. "I saw you. You and him. You threw the torch. You laughed." Flagg's face darkened. "You'd best shut your mouth. You're nothing but a—" He did not get to finish. Clara took a step out onto the boardwalk, to face the crowd, to face her accusers. She was shaking from head to foot, but she stood tall. "My name is Clara Thorne," she said, her voice ringing in the sudden, dead silence. The preacher, his wife, they all stared. "You all know me," she said. "You have all whispered about me. You have called me barren. You have called me impure. You have called me a waste. You have judged me for a past I did not choose." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "Maybe you are right. Maybe I am all those things. Maybe I am broken. I am not ashamed of it. I am not ashamed to be a woman who has known grief, or to have a past that was not perfect. She turned, her hand finding Elias's good arm, holding him. But this man is not a monster. You whisper that he is a killer. I will tell you the truth. He is a man of grief, but he is a good man. He is the man who gave me shelter when every person on this street would have let me freeze. He is the man who has worked that land, his land, with his own hands, asking for nothing from any of you. Her voice rose. Catching with a sob she refused to let fall. He is the man who was beaten, nearly to death, by these men, because he would not sell what is his, because he would not run. And when they were done, they came back. They burned our barn. They tried to burn our home, with us in it. She looked straight at Preacher Davies. You speak of sin. You speak of God. Is this your Christian charity? To let your wives spread lies? To let your children throw stones? To stand by in silence while a good man's life is stolen by thieves? She pointed at Quinn and Flagg. Amos Vane did this, but he used your whispers to do it. He used your judgment as his weapon. And you, all of you, you let him. The silence was profound. It was a silence of deep, collective shame. The townspeople looked at each other. They looked at the battered, proud couple. They looked at the widow Albright, standing guard. They looked at Sutton, his arms crossed. And they looked at Quinn and Flagg, who were suddenly terribly outnumbered. Sheriff Brody stood up. He was a weak man, but he was not a fool. He knew which way the wind was blowing. He picked up the forged deed. He looked at Elias's original. He tore the forged deed in half, then in quarters, and dropped the pieces on the floor. This document is a fraud, Brody announced, his voice loud for the crowd. The sale is nullified. Elias Thorne's title stands. You cannot do this, Quinn roared, his hand on his gun. Brody's own hand fell to his holster. I just did. Your boss has no claim here. He looked at Quinn, then at Flagg. And as for the assault on Mr. Thorne and the arson, I'd say you and your men are no longer welcome in this county. I want you gone by sundown. Get out, before I find a legal reason to arrest you for disturbing the peace. Quinn looked at the crowd. There was no support there. Only cold, hard faces. He looked at Sutton, who looked ready to break him in half. He looked at Elias, who was not a ghost, but a man who had survived and who was loved. He was defeated, not by a gun, but by a woman's words and a town's guilt. Quinn spit on the floor. This ain't over. He and Flagg pushed through the crowd, mounted their horses, and rode out of town. The land baron, his leverage of public opinion gone, withdrew. His power was in the shadows, and Clara had just thrown a blinding light on him. The crowd began to disperse. Quiet, ashamed. Elias and Clara stood on the boardwalk, breathing. It was over. They walked to the mercantile. Mrs. Hatcher was behind the counter, her eyes red. She loaded their sacks with flour, coffee, salt, and cartridges for the rifle. When Elias put his coins on the counter, she pushed his hand away. No, it's on the house. Mr. Thorne. Ma'am. Her voice was thick. We are sorry. They loaded the supplies onto Jericho. As they were about to mount, a small figure darted from the crowd. It was the boy, the preacher's son, who had thrown the first stone. He ran up to Clara, his face terrified. He shoved a single, wilted, bright yellow wildflower into her hand. Then, before she could speak, he turned and fled back to his mother, who was watching, her hand over her mouth. Clara looked at the flower. She closed her hand around it. A small, dry sob escaped her. Elias put his good arm around her shoulders. They rode home. The next day, Elias began to clear the wreckage of the barn. He was still in pain, his ribs on fire, but he worked. Clara worked beside him, hauling away charred timber, her hands raw. The work was a penance. It was a reclaiming. On the third day, a wagon rolled up the trail. It was Matthias Sutton. The wagon was loaded with fresh-cut pine beams. Town took up a collection, Sutton said, not meeting Elias's eyes. He was gruff, embarrassed. We do not abide that kind of business here. Figured you could use a hand. He stayed. The widow Albright came too. She brought a hot stew and sharp words, and she worked as hard as any man, stacking the new wood. The three outcasts and the blacksmith, they rebuilt the barn. It was not the same barn. Elias made it sturdier, the foundation dug deeper, the beams thicker. It was a fortress. It was a home. When it was finished, Elias stood back, his body aching, but his heart was quiet. Clara came out of the cabin. She had a small can of paint, the one she had bought from Mrs. Hatcher. She began to paint the new, heavy barn door. "What are you doing?" Elias asked. "It needs color," she said. She painted it a bright, defiant, beautiful red. That night, the air was cool, the sky a vast, empty bowl of stars. They lay on their bedroll outside, looking up. The new barn was a dark shape, but they could both see the bright, new door, a square of hope in the darkness. Clara rested her head on his chest, her hand over his heart. She could feel its steady, strong beat. "Let what they said die with the dust," she whispered, her voice soft in the great quiet. "Let all of it, my past, your past, their words, let it all be ashes. Let us live new." Elias held her, his grip tight. He felt the truth of her words settle into his bones. He was not the killer. He was not the ghost. He was the man lying here, under the stars, holding his wife. He had nothing left of his old life. He had everything he needed. "Then I'll give you all I've got left," he said. The seasons turned. The high, hard summer softened into a golden, sharp autumn. The new barn stood strong. Clara's small, hopeless garden had exploded in a riot of red, blue, and yellow, a defiant patch of beauty against the pine cabin. One afternoon, riding back from Junction, they found him. He was by the side of the trail, a small, thin creature, no older than 6. He was huddled behind a rock, his face streaked with dirt, his eyes wide and animal wild. An orphan, left behind by a wagon train that had not wanted to be slowed by sickness. Clara slid off Jericho, her heart aching. She held out her hand. "It is all right. We will not hurt you." The boy flinched, scrambling back. Elias dismounted, his large frame a shadow. He did not speak. He just sat on a rock, 10 feet away, and waited. He took a piece of dried venison from his pocket. He tossed it gently onto the ground between them. The boy stared at it, his stomach growling. He snatched it, devouring it like a starved wolf. They took him home. He did not speak for a week. He slept by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, his eyes following Clara everywhere. She fed him, bathed him, and cut his matted hair. Elias sat one night, carving a piece of pine. He finished, and wordlessly, he gave the boy a small, perfectly carved wooden horse. The boy, Thomas, held it. That night, he spoke his first word, horse. The ranch grew. Life, stubborn and unlikely, was taking root. Tom began to follow Elias, mimicking his walk, helping him mend the fences. He followed Clara, helping her water the flowers. Winter was coming. The first snows had dusted the high peaks. The three of them sat on the cabin porch, watching the stars come out, one by one. The air was sharp and clean. The red door of the barn was a bright, warm promise in the twilight. Tom was asleep, his head in Clara's lap, his small hand clutching the wooden horse. Elias had his good arm around her, his hand resting on her shoulder. Clara looked at the sleeping boy. She looked at the strong, quiet man beside her. All of this. It was her life, her family, built not on a perfect past, but on a shared, broken, and rebuilt future. She leaned her head against his chest, her heart full to bursting. "Maybe this is what strong is," she whispered, her breath a small cloud in the cold. Not the killing, not the running. She closed her eyes, feeling the steady beat of his heart. Staying. Thank you for listening to our story around the campfire. We'd love to know where you're listening from, so please comment below to connect with fellow pioneers. Subscribe to the Wild West Campfire channel, and share your thoughts in English.